That's kind of my takeaway is that there's a lot more emphasis with Databricks leading the charge and maybe Anthropic and OpenAI still kind of playing catch up. Because Databricks is saying, look, rather than boil the ocean to generate code, which is still not very good, why don't we focus on helping out the software development lifecycle and using generative AI approaches throughout the lifecycle in ways that are really pragmatic right now. And whether you're doing fault detection or root cause analysis, things like that. And it does open the door for graphs to be used in this area too, because you're doing things like generating hypotheses and then tying together evidence and hypotheses. Um, and so that's kind of the takeaway is looking at tools like MLflow and DSPy, and then looking at what's coming out of research now in neurosymbolic, that it's a lot more programmatic work on LLMs for a lot more
Mhm.
real world kinds of benefits, better explainable, more efficient results. And that's the buzz I'm catching.
Welcome to Graph Geeks in Discussion. I'm Amy Hodler, and today we have a special guest, my friend and colleague, Paco Nathan. Paco's been a leader in the AI and in the graph space since long before they were cool, and has a lot of wisdom. Paco is joining us today to talk a little bit about some of the trends, which we've all seen how fast this market is moving. So we're very excited to have him. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Amy. Great to be here.
So this year has been moving really fast, and maybe last year a little bit as well. And I know you've been out in the road lately, quite a bit,
Yeah, a
traveling,
lot.
conferences, and I wanted to get your beat on like what's top of mind for people right now. What are the trends that you're seeing?
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, I just came back from a few trips. San Francisco had the AI Agent Builders World Tour. And then at UC Santa Cruz, we had neurosymbolic learning and reasoning, neurosymbolic AI, um, which has been going on for like 20 years, although it's really picking up now. And then also I was in DC for some work and for a private AI event there.
Mhm.
So a few takeaways. The AI agent builder world tour, Dimitrios Brinkman and company at MLOps community have been doing this literally across the world. I was so amazed at their capabilities because Dimitrios and company, they're from Frankfurt, Germany, and they organized this event in San Francisco, and it was like packed. But it was basically so low res, as like all the signs were handwritten on white pieces of paper. There's no corporate signage or booths. It's all just like a bunch of tables. People set up laptops. It looks like a high school science fair. And they ran this in April and then had so much demand they came back in September and did it. So it's kind of cool to get this snapshot across like,
Yeah, yeah.
early Q2 and then like late Q3 of how much has changed. And it feeds into
Totally.
some of the takeaways I'll have. I went with a friend yeah, who's editor for Make Magazine. So if you know of like Maker Faire and Maker Labs, their crew really wanted to understand what's going on with like agent
Mhm.
builders. So we got some pretty cool, fun demos as a result. Um, and anyway, I have some takeaways of that, but let me transition. The other thing that I got to go to was it's called NESI, neurosymbolic learning and reasoning. And so this is where we really look formally, more from a research side, but industry's coming in now too, looking formally at hybrid AI. Where, for instance, where can knowledge
Mhm.
graphs augment what's going on with LLMs? Or just in general, for machine learning models, which, machine learning is based like on supervised learning. You've got loss functions, you're using generalization. These are statistical approaches to learning. There's a lot of other forms of learning, and there's a lot of forms of reasoning. And even though there's some really fantastic things like chain of thoughts and graphs of thoughts, programming thought, there's a lot of interesting patterns to use with LLMs to do reasoning, but they're very expensive. And results are still kind of mixed. There's a lot of excellent ways that have been developed over decades of doing more symbolic reasoning or even probabilistic symbolic reasoning. I love probabilistic soft logic, for instance. I've loved using that in different projects. Also came out of UC Santa Cruz. So, long story short, at the NESI conference, I got to see my friend Deborah McGinnis gave just a brilliant talk about how basically a career retrospective on like how to do a PhD, how to do research. If you're a young assistant professor, you're trying to figure out what your career is going to be like. It's a really difficult time because of all the funding cuts. It's a difficult time because of some of the things coming out of Silicon Valley, and believe me, we all were talking about that. But Deborah had really brilliant advice, and when that video comes out, check it. Also, Guy Vandenbroek from Star AI Lab at UCLA, who's been leading work on probabilistic circuits and also on semantic loss functions, and a lot of the formalisms for how can you really leverage network analytics, probabilistic graphs to do much more useful things with LLMs, but in much more explainable and bounded ways. So, for instance, instead of spending billions of dollars to train guardrails into models, why don't we use symbolic reasoning on the outside to constrain model outputs for a given domain context? Things like that.
Now,
Uh,
Paco,
and
for our listener who aren't familiar with neurosymbolic and
yeah,
what that means from a neurosymbolic AI, can you give a just a short definition of what all that encompasses?
certainly. So, if I were to use an LLM and I were completing some text, I say the words see, spot, and then marker. And I want the model to fill in the marker. That's how these models work. If somebody says see, spot, your answer or the completion of that sentence is probably not see, spot, deconstruct the space-time continuum. It's probably going to be see, spot, run. I mean, that's just what people say. And so when you look at how speech patterns work, how words follow each other in sequences, this is something that is at the core of how language models work, is understanding the sequences.
Mhm.
It's fairly sparse. So if people are not aware of this, anytime you have deep learning, you can get like a fully mathematically analytic model to cover the network by using something called a hidden Markov model. Theoretically, you can do that. So you can model what's going on in deep learning ostensibly by using HMMs, hidden Markov models. Unfortunately, though, the technique is very expensive, and a given answer might not come back before, say, the sun burns out. So they're really expensive and they're super impractical. But there's a trick you can use, for instance, in probabilistic circuits. You can look at a hidden Markov model if you're familiar with Bayes' theorem and doing like Bayesian nets, that kind of conditional probability calculation. Part of Bayes' model is based on having like the second term in the model in the theorem. There's priors, so you have sort of all things being equal. This is what we would assume because of what we've seen in the past. There's kind of a Bayesian prior. Rather than calculate a Bayesian prior and conditional probabilities on combinations of thousands of different possible words, if you understand that at a given point in context for a given domain, the number of words to complete the sentence is actually pretty limited, like it's countable. If you understand that, then you can flip in a different kind of probabilistic model and actually make this thing computable. So you can actually look within a domain and say, here's what an LLM should be producing if it's going to stay consistent within this domain at this point in time. And if it goes off the rails and starts coming up with something just strange, which, hey, watch your temperature settings, these happen. Um, then you can use a probabilistic model that's very relatively simple to compute and be able to you know, say, no, actually, this is the set you should choose from.
Mm.
Um, and that's really useful when you want to do some kind of chaining and some kind of inference and reasoning then on your results to be able to explain them, but also be able to calculate them much, much quicker than you could just by doing the raw model itself. So, hey, I hate to be too mathy, but this is a place where some really practical advanced math comes into play.
Yeah.
Looking at marginal or conditional probabilities to be able to do some explanation of these large models, and also to be able to do much more cost-effective reasoning.
Yeah. It's interesting. I am part of a AI book club, and the more we talk about different problems in different aspects of AI, because AI is much bigger than large language models,
Yeah.
that we keep coming back to this need for hybrid approaches, and
Yeah.
taking different tools that are good for different things and using them together, which I think maybe I don't know if that's vogue right now, but it seems like the obvious way forward. And for us, one of the biggest questions are how do you get these different methods to respect each other and work together? But do you see when you talked about hybrid AI, is that
Yeah.
kind of where the groups you're talking to are looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about like GraphRag, RAG is a way of using something
Mm,
from recommender systems technology, using vector
yeah.
stores and embedding models, and then taking the results, which is an information retrieval problem, take the top of results and throw them in an LLM to summarize. And GraphRag is the idea of, well, wait, let's step back. Let's use the graph to try to really understand, like, let's improve. RAG is sort of infamous for having poor recall. Like, you might catch some of the terms that are related, but only syntactically related. You won't catch terms that are a few hops away that are semantically related.
Yeah.
So if you throw in a graph, then you're doing some symbolic reasoning to find out, hey, what are the terms that are really important to include in this answer? And you can get better results. And I see large customers getting better results by using GraphRag, which is a kind of hybrid approach. This would be an example of like neurosymbolic. Um, and it goes deeper. You can use, for instance, a knowledge graph when you're training or fine-tuning a large language model for a given context. There's something called a semantic loss function. So this is still kind of a research stage, but can we use what we get from the graph about the context at the point where we're deciding how to generalize the model? So that's also very helpful. There's a lot of ways of doing inference, probabilistic inference that leverages symbolic systems such as knowledge graphs. Data log is a language that's been used a lot of variants. And I've seen other work that's even less, uh, there's a lot of problems when you get into like formal predicate logic. It's usually kind of brittle. But then there are other techniques that are coming in now of maybe a little more forgiving ways of handling logic. And so all these
Mm,
come in under hybrid. And really, the idea is use the best of both worlds. If you really want to look at hybrid AI and neurosymbolic, the sort of master of this field, master is the wrong word, the real champion and the person who's been doing this for many years is in the Netherlands. His name is Frank van Harmelen, and he's been leading a large team doing neurosymbolic AI for a long time. And definitely look up any of his talks; they're really fantastic. But to your point, Amy, about using programmatic approaches, using programming tools. Yeah, that's kind of the flip side of this argument. Neurosymbolic AI was about research, and then I went to AI Builders World Tour, and that was more about what's in production now. And it was a similar message. There's, Claude Code is kind of all the buzz in Silicon Valley right now.
yeah.
You really can't go anywhere without people beating you over the head with it. I saw it crash, so whatever. OpenAI is coming out with Codex, which is sort of their answer to try to catch up with Claude Code. People are really focused on sort of boiling the ocean so they can generate code. For those who haven't been watching, there's something called a K Prize. So I'll get on my soapbox here. A friend of mine, formerly colleague at Databricks, Andy Konwinski was co-founder of Databricks, co-founder of Apache Spark. And Spark, Matei Zaharia, and Andy Konwinski, they started this because a friend of theirs, Lester McKay, was competing in the Netflix prize. And Lester was complaining about how the tools were just so bad. So they're like, hey, let's build something for you. And that was Spark. Andy later went and co-founded another little company called Perplexity. If you're in the AI space, you might have heard of Perplexity. So anyway, long story short, Andy's been looking at all these people generating code, and he was like a Berkeley postdoc in software engineering. He's like, yeah, I'm not sure. Let's try using the Netflix prize approach. So there's something, if you look it up, it's called the K Prize, the Konwinski Prize, where Andy is putting up $1 million of his own money if you can get to 70% or better on it's called the SWE benchmark, or SWE bench. So basically what they do is put in your solution, we'll commit it into a repo in GitHub, And then we'll collect on other projects, we'll collect where there's an issue and then a pull request to solve the issue. And we'll basically generate a benchmark out of real life coding problems that have solutions that are approved by, project governance. And so some months later, we will run your AI projects on the real world benchmark. And do you want to take a guess at where the leaderboard for that is right now? How much accuracy?
I'll guess at 35%. Oh.
No, 7.5%. So there's $1 million
Oh.
purse, all these people claiming how great they can generate code. The accuracy so far, the best they can get is about 7.5% on benchmarks that are not polluted, that are basically time dispersed, so you don't have the pollution in them.
So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting when they start trying to solve crossword puzzles, because that's a whole other
they're
level
gone.
of difficulty.
Decades. Utter decades. So definitely watch the K prize, because I think Andy is kind of snarkily saying bullshit about all these claims about copilots generating code. On the other hand, the takeaway out of the Builder Summit was a really good move by Databricks. So there's the Spark project at Databricks and other things like Unity and whatever, icebergs, all that. One of the sister projects, though, that's been really important over the past several years is something called MLflow. It's a way of instrumenting workflows for applications based on machine learning. And it can be instrumented across a broad range. Like, you can instrument how you're developing your requirements and specifications. You can instrument like customer support feedback all the way through development, but also production run. MLflow is a nice complement to what goes on with Spark, because it generates a lot of log files and it needs a lot of log files to be analyzed. Spark's good for that. There's another recent project called DSPy, and I will shout out to one of our close friends and colleagues, Prashant Rao, who really took the time and was like, no, you got to look at DSPy. Here's how it works. And actually, Prashant has been leading a small informal study group with some friends we've been working through, and I've been implementing a lot of stuff in DSPy lately. So the deal is, you can use DSPy if you think about how SQL is a way of implying what you want to have happen in a join. It doesn't actually show how to do a join. It just says, after the join completes in my SQL statement, this is what the results must look like. So it's a very implied way, and then there's optimizations under the hood. DSPy is a similar thing. It says, here's how I want my LLM to process a prompt. I'm not going to spell out the prompt. I'm just going to imply what needs to happen. Here's the inputs, here's the outputs, this is the transform. And then here are some conditions that it must hold to. So that's cool, because now you can optimize how that prompt gets generated, much like SQL optimizes how a query gets generated. And if you have MLflow to instrument across your workflow and even like collecting customer feedback, then you can use that to use, there's a technique called AutoML that's been around for a long time, of training the hyperparameters for machine learning models based off of evidence that we've had when we've run them. So these three things together, Spark, MLflow, and DSPy, get really interesting for being able to do LLM integration. And it's really important for graphs, because people are using DSPy to do things like named entity recognition, basically any extraction, entity linking, relation extraction, and other types of things where graphs and LLMs are being used together. So that's kind of my takeaway, is that there's a lot more emphasis with Databricks leading the charge, and maybe Anthropic and OpenAI still kind of playing catch up. Because Databricks is saying, look, rather than boil the ocean to generate code, which is still not very good, why don't we focus on helping out the software development lifecycle and using generative AI approaches throughout the lifecycle in ways that are really pragmatic right now. And whether you're doing fault detection or, root cause analysis, things like that. And it does open the door for graphs to be used in this area too, because you're doing things like generating hypotheses and then tying together evidence and hypotheses. And so that's kind of the takeaway, is looking at tools like MLflow and DSPy, and then looking at what's coming out of research now in neurosymbolic, that it's a lot more programmatic work on LLMs for a lot more real world kinds of benefits, better explainable, more efficient results. And that's the buzz I'm catching.
So even though those are very different events, and one is more, builders and what's practical today, and the other is more on the research side, you're saying that both of those are still part of a common thread, which is how do we make this more practical end to end?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
I mean, there's a couple of projects I've been working on with some colleagues for some large customers where we need to use LLMs to do some summarization and do some extraction, and there's graphs that are being used along with it. And we've been evaluating
Right.
using the really large services like ChatGPT and whatnot, Claude, Grok, all that stuff. But then also using locally hosted medium-sized models because, frankly, if you're a large bank, you don't want to send your private information. You can't send your private information out to
Yeah.
the big services. So you want to run locally hosted. So I've been doing all kinds of bake-offs and evaluations and all this prompt engineering, context engineering is a better way to say it. Um, and just seeing like what actually works or not. And, even if you're running on GPUs, how long it takes to run things. And I look on LinkedIn and I see people making these enormous pronouncements off of, things they've read about. They've never run hands on. And I think,
Yeah.
wow, like one step of what you just described would probably take about a half hour to run. And you're saying you'd run it billions of times? I don't think so.
Yeah. So, what's your biggest surprise based on these recent events or at these recent events?
Yeah, that's cool. Biggest surprise. Um, well, this kind of goes back to when we were at KGC earlier this year, and we were meeting up with Adriano and talking about their work. On there's a Verilog is a variant of Datalog, and there's so much that
Mhm.
can be done with these kind of probabilistic languages. Whether you're actually implementing a knowledge graph or whether you're doing some kind of algorithmic work or some type of inference and reasoning. So seeing that show up in production as well as showing up very much again in research is very compelling to me. I've been out of grad school for a long time, but some of this stuff was, I mean, like Prolog was, what we were working with in grad school for formal logic. Some of the stuff has been around for a long time. So seeing it come back, but come back in earnest and with
Yeah.
very pragmatic kinds of applications, that's the biggest surprise.
Interesting. Do you think next year or maybe even later this year, we're going to be talking about probabilistic graphs more often?
I do think so. There's a project called KG Lab that some colleagues and I have been doing for past 5 years or so. I know Bloomberg uses it for training. There's others that use
Mhm.
it for training. We included a section on probabilistic graphs in there using PSL. So shout out to Lise Couture and her team at now at at UC Santa Cruz for probabilistic soft logic and just what you can do as far as data quality and validation with graph construction. Really super interesting. But now I think we're getting more and more into very practical applications of reasoning. So yeah, I think I'm hearing a lot more about probabilistic graphs.
Sounds like a the next podcast or webinar. We'll
Oh,
we'll have to maybe we'll dive into to that. But to shift a little into and
good.
I guess we're already talking about future a little bit. Tell me what's coming up. What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to? Where are we going to see you out there?
Well, awesome. I'm really looking forward. There are several conferences coming up I'm really excited about. So this is the busy season for conferences.
Yeah.
So the next thing coming up is actually at the end of this month. Well, I guess realistically, the beginning of next month. I'm going to be in Copenhagen. There's the Semantic Layer Symposium, which is being hosted by friends at Enterprise Knowledge. Actually, I was just visiting them in DC a few days ago. So Lula Tesfanier and Lula Tesfanier, Benoit, the whole crew out of EK. I'm really looking forward to that. There's going to be some great folks there. I'm looking forward to a lot of folks from, especially from Europe and UK, who are working in knowledge graph and related areas of graph technology. Will be presenting Ben Clench and others. Um, Semantic layer is something which I think gets beaten up a bit in certain areas because sometimes there's not good definition or a really workable definition.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to Lilith and others who've been working very hard to put more definitions on this and show practical examples. So that's a lot of what this conference is about, is like, what are people doing in practice?
Nice. I'm liking to see that because the definitions around what a semantic layer is are all over the place and cause a lot of confusion. So
Yeah,
looking forward
there's a
to
lot of
reporting
woo
on that.
there.
Yeah.
There is much woo out there with semantic
Yes.
layer. But
Yeah.
there are good reasons for doing really intentional approaches for managing
Mhm.
knowledge. Shout out to my friend Jessica Talisman. Um, and where do semantics come in, and where do graphs help you represent
Mhm.
and navigate the semantics? Um, and
Excellent.
then another thing, about a week later, going to be in Austin. I'm really looking forward to ML Ops World. There's a conference every year by
Mhm.
the Toronto Machine Learning Society. It's held down in Austin. It's a big tent in the sense that the theme is
Mhm.
about ML Ops, but realistically, all kinds of roles are there. So there'll be product managers and data science people and data engineers and blah, blah, blah. It's not just ops.
Nice.
Um, and I really like that kind of inclusive forum because you get to explore a lot more depth as far as
Mm.
what kind of trends are going on right now. But I can imagine there'll be a lot about graphs and LLMs given the timing and agents. And I'll be speaking there. I've had a series of talks about dark money and understanding the graphiness of
Mhm.
how to detect dark money flows, and also how this is being used
Yeah.
to interdict dark money, but then the things that go along with it, which are like weapons trade and human trafficking and other kinds of badness. So Austin, October 8th through 10th. Really looking forward to that. And then after
And then, of course,
that,
you and I will both be at ODSC, the Open Data Science Conference. Looking
absolutely.
forward to seeing you there in person. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
I
really
think
looking
there's
forward to
gonna
that.
be quite a bit of graph there. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this this year especially, and I'm going to be doing a podcast in a couple days with the organizer, kind of going through some of those issues because I think they are seeing an
Yes.
uptick, and so we'll try and cover some of that. I'm not
Mhm.
sure when the podcast comes out, but I'm sure it'll be pretty quick. But this is in San Francisco on, let's see, September 28th,
Uh,
29th,
Oc
30th. So October.
October.
Sorry, we'll be out of September
Yes.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right before Halloween, we'll be in San
Yeah.
Francisco, and I think I'm in a couple other conferences that week in San Francisco. Also, I think. Anyway, new data and some others. So that's going on, but then that takes us into November. And
Yeah.
I'm super thrilled about Connected Data London, which is November 20th and 21st, and then Forward Data, which will be in Paris the Monday afterwards. So I'm looking forward to London and Paris. We've just finished reviewing most of the proposals for Connected Data London, and there's
Oh,
some really fantastic talks. I'm very excited about that. There's new speakers, new use cases, a lot's coming in. And I would say that the overall quality of talks is really, really compelling, really fantastic.
wonderful. Last year was an amazing event. Really good, not just talks, but I would say the master classes are like very meaty at that conference.
They were.
So I'm looking forward to being there. Yeah.
I think
All
that,
right.
I mean, it hasn't been announced, but I can imagine good probability there'll be an excellent Shackle class. And I think Shackle is interesting in the graph space because the new version coming up has much more features for inference, very, very
Mm.
practical uses of graphs. Veronica Heinsbach, of course, is a person who's been teaching a lot about this. I'll be doing a course, Prashant Rao and I will be doing a course about constructing high quality graphs using Senzing and Kuzu, but also using
Nice.
Gliner and just other things that go along with it. So we'll be doing some work there, and the masterclass will be fun. I think really the social aspects of Connected Data London were my favorite last year. We got to have a
Yeah.
GraphGeeks dinner at this one of my favorite pubs in London, which features the best curry pot pies. So it's sort of British plus Indian cuisine. And we got a bunch of folks from Graph Geeks together to have a pint or two. So I'm looking forward to actually
Yeah.
the people and seeing the people there. Very much so.
Oh, always good. And I'll say on that note, I am. It looks like I'll have a small Graph Geeks gathering at
Oh, cool.
ODSC, so I think that'll be Wednesday night. I'm just locking down some of the details, so
Oh,
look
fantastic.
forward to that. I will let folks know as soon as I have that. And as far as Connected Data London, I'm hoping we can get at least even a small group together, if it's not
Oh, yeah.
everybody, while we're at Connected Data London as well. So,
And if you are
ooh,
anybody out there, if you're heading to Forward Data in Paris, also let me know. I'm going to stay over and
mm,
take the trip across the channel. I definitely have some friends who will be presenting there. Probably more of a data engineering conference, but I think that one other aspect of buzz I'm seeing in the industry lately is there's been a lot of uptick for people working in data engineering now are realizing the needs for semantics, where this comes in for data validation, where this comes in for understanding domain context when you're using data products across context. Just a lot of areas of where there's really practical applications of semantics and data engineering. So I imagine we'll get a dose of that there too.
that's one of the things as far as a trend, I'm kind of curious where that's going to lead in the desire to have more semantically rich data and the need to be able to provide that data uh, in a way that
Yeah.
may or may not be graphy. And there's again a lot of confusion of when do you need a graph versus something that might be a semantic layer but not a graph.
I mean, you can use a knowledge base as opposed to a knowledge graph. But
Yeah,
ultimately, these definitions are connected. So there
yeah,
is inherently some aspect of connected data, and you end up having to do some link traversals. So even if you use a knowledge base, you kind of end up doing graph light just to navigate it. So I mean, to give people an example, a lot of how you explain semantics, you have tools like taxonomies that describe like a class hierarchy. If you think about object-oriented
mm,
programming, a taxonomy is basically your class hierarchy. But then there's also tools like thesaurus, which describe, think of like what classes have been instantiated and what are their aliases. Um, and so, what are synonyms or how are different objects related to each other as they've been
mm,
instantiated? A thesaurus is a really useful thing to have too. And when you have either of those kind of artifacts for describing semantics, both of those are very graphy. So that's kind of like the thin
yeah.
edge of the wedge for bringing in graphs.
That's a good way to think about the inroad. I've been seeing people use both your like a standard data format, whatever that might be, or like a relational
Yeah,
data format, and a
yeah,
graph together for their semantics. And a lot of times the graph portion is so that you can see the different views, so you can look at things categorized very quickly in different ways, and you can see the connections. But then using more of a traditional relational format because of the ease of interacting and updating, because it's already hooked into all the other tools and their sales systems and their product systems and their SKUs.
sure.
And so just moving it into a very clean, organized, highly managed format, and then using the graph to kind of look at it from a more graphy, global, flexible way, which I think is kind of interesting to, again, best of both worlds. I guess we're going back to hybrid, right? Or kind of circle back to that thought.
Absolutely. I mean, there's definitely been a rise in what's called proxy graph. If you've been seeing that, I think Bailey at the graph expert at Google is Bailey, who did so much work on knowledge graph and then so much work on Spanner and Spanner graph. And I think there's a product on its way out from Google. But the idea is, yeah, can you take all your relational data, sum it together, but then expose a graph for a particular use, a set of people in an application,
Mhm.
expose it as almost like a materialized view out of SQL,
Yes.
and reuse all these big
Yeah.
data tools. And then from there, can we put some semantics over the top for like data validation, inference, and
Yeah.
then maybe pull a few of these together and have a labeled property graph where we actually end up doing our visualization and our
Mhm.
machine learning and our graph analytics, etc. So
Yeah.
a few layers, but definitely reusing former tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Paco, anything else this year that you're looking forward to seeing or anticipating coming out?
Anything on the horizon? Well, I'm curious about announcements at CDL. That's usually a pretty good place
Mm,
for the graph community
okay.
to come together. I'm hopeful about some announcements there. I'm aware of a few projects that may be making some announcements. I probably shouldn't say too much,
Mhm.
but
Okay.
it's interesting to me. I'm just I'm hearing very mixed messages. I hear some industry analysts saying that people aren't doing much with knowledge graphs. GraphRag isn't getting used. Then I'm going out to like big customers who are making really big use
Mm,
of GraphRag
mm,
and using knowledge graphs at scale. I think that one of the things that's happening in the industry is there's just so much flood. There's like this torrent of like PR and whatnot coming out of Silicon Valley. It's really hard to
mm,
hear what's happening in enterprise use cases because they're not the thing that's at the top of the list. So I think there's a kind of latency that's built in for the industry to recognize itself. Um,
mm,
and, my friends at Gartner that I know who work in the graph space, Svetlana Sikular and others, they're doing their best to try to keep up and put it in perspective.
yeah.
But there's a kind of inherent latency where you sort of need to wait for a couple of years to get all the details to put together. We definitely saw that with graph neural networks, where Neo4j commissioned an industry study that said, no, nobody's using them. And then the next year, both LinkedIn and Spotify published about their big graph neural network use cases.
Yeah.
So I think in a way we kind of just have to wait for a couple of years to understand what's happening right now. Unfortunately, this field is moving so fast that waiting a couple of
Yeah.
years is like waiting an ice age. So we're that that's the big thing. It's just, so I guess the thing I'm saying there is I look forward to Connected Data London and others to really hear directly from people what they're working on.
I it's a recommendation that I've made to a couple people lately is you need to go out and go to a couple conferences. I might
Yeah,
not have said that 10 years ago
yeah,
because
yeah,
you could just follow online and talk to the right people. But to your point, things are moving really quickly, and what you're seeing on LinkedIn or some press announcements aren't really what's going on in the floor. And I
yeah.
think being able to listen and talk to people that are actually out there doing things, there's just really nothing better to get, your pulse on what's happening. And of course, talking to people like yourself who visit all of these different conferences that we can't be at. So
We'll try, but I mean, to your point, I mean, definitely put in a plug for go to the master classes. It's a really great investment. You can get some
yeah.
hands-on, some real perspective, hear what other people are saying very directly, listen to the questions really. But like master classes at CDL, Connected Data London, I think there's similar concept tutorials around ODSC. I
Yes.
think that's really where you need to get the grounding right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Paco, thank you for joining us and taking the time in your busy schedule, your busy travel schedule, in spending a little time with the Graph Geeks community and just letting us know what you're hearing so far. And we'll definitely want to talk later in this year and wrap it out as well and hear about these other events.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Amy. I really appreciate it.